For our first presentation, we'll have Ioana Gandrabur. She's a musician. The title of the talk is As I See It, a blind musician's point of view on the importance of accessible technology and shifting social biases. In this talk, she will illustrate the role of accessible technology in helping to create a more inclusive world. She will further reflect on how social preconceptions shape us and how it will be possible to turn a perceived weakness into a strength. Ioana is a classical guitarist who has been blind since birth. She holds 4 degrees in music from institutions in Canada, Germany, and Switzerland. She has won prizes from several international guitar competitions. She performed concerts and teaches around the world. And now she's also teaching us using Zoom. So that's probably a first for her, hopefully not the last. Ioana is also a motivational speaker who promotes self-empowerment and helps to shift social preconceptions about disabilities. Passionate about technology, Ioana is a keen advocate for accessible design. She also moderates computer information exchanges groups for visually impaired users.
It's a real pleasure to be here with everyone, and it's an adventure, as you can see, a little bit technologically, but hey, this is all about stretching boundaries, and it's a special treat to be here and share the stage virtually with my sister. So when I was a kid, one of my dreams was that I would be able to take pictures like anybody else and be able to share pictures with people. I thought that was such a fascinating thing to be able to do. And my sister Simona, in fact, built me a little camera out of paper, and I appreciated her effort, but I really thought that that camera sucked. But who would have thought that years later, now with my iPhone, not only does it tell me how many faces are in the focus, it tells me whether the picture I'm taking is centered or not, if it's level or not. And now recently, it even recognizes people from other pictures of mine. So AI is enabling me to say that Simona is centered in the picture I'm taking. So finally, through AI and through technology in general, it's a bit of a dream come true. I get to take pictures. Another dream of mine was to be able to drive a car on my own. And while we're not there yet, I can totally see that it's something that is already clearly in the reach of possibilities. In the meantime, I'll have to content myself to be just a nagging backseat driver for my husband, because now I'm with accessible maps and GPS apps. I can tell people feeling that I can be in a car and know where we're going, check if the cab driver is taking the quickest route. It's small details like that that make a huge difference and that open doors that were completely unimaginable before. Another way that AI can enhance my possibilities and is there is an app now that also helps you navigate indoor places. It's called Clue, and it uses the camera to remember if, let's say, somebody brings me from point A to point B in a restaurant, and then the person can leave me there, and the phone will help me navigate the reverse route. It's not completely reliable, but it's getting there. And so it's more and more the camera of the phone is interpreting things for me and making sense of the world in a way that would have been unimaginable not too long ago. Microsoft, for example, has this great app called Seeing AI. And Seeing AI, what it does is kind of, I like to call it the pocket knife, because it's a power tool. It can do OCR, so I can be in a concert hall and just read the program notes of the person that's performing that night without having to ask whoever is with me to read it for me. It can also figure out if the light is on or off, detect colors, and more recently, it can detect photos. Let's say I have photos and I don't remember when I took them. Should I keep this photo? Should I not keep it? And you run it through Seeing AI, and it actually describes the scene for you. And it's all done through AI. It's not another person at the end that is doing it. So it's really fascinating how far AI has managed to to interpret these things for me. So although I mentioned Microsoft now, and they are actually catching up with accessibility, probably the landslide moment for me was when Apple started putting out iPhones with integrated accessibility. Because although for a long time, Microsoft was the main producer of computers and the main access to digital technology for visually impaired people was the PC, and in some ways it still is, it was so only by purchasing special adaptive programs that made it possible for us to hear what's on the screen. It's called screen readers. But what Apple did, and it's baked in the accessibility out of the box. So I can take any iPhone, any Mac out of the box, or I can go to the Apple store and try out their newest products, and they work without me having to do anything else but say to Siri to turn on VoiceOver. And I can use the devices the same way as anybody else could. And this might seem like a small detail, but it makes a huge psychological. We are not different. It's not like anybody. Because of thoughtful design and thoughtful implementation, things work for us just as well as for the sighted people. And interestingly enough, doing these accessibility features, implementing them right away, rather than an afterthought, it really creates many more possibilities and more flexibility, and they're more powerful. And I mean, and they're useful for anybody. You should see my husband, he's using my screen reader when at some point it was way too sunny and he couldn't see the screen. So all of a sudden I hear him use the phone with the screen reader the way I would use it. So it's kind of cool. Why does this make such a big difference? I think when you have a visual impairment or some other like visible difference, I think it makes it that much more important to feel that you can fit in. I mean, after all, fitting in and being part of the group is one of, I think, the basic human needs, to feel that you belong. And in fact, for the longest time, I would have rather negated that blindness is anything important for me. It was just this non-essential detail. It would have been inconceivable maybe 20 years ago for me to hold this talk about blindness and about disabilities. I just wanted it to be a non-issue. I'm a blind guitarist, I'm a blonde guitarist, it's all irrelevant, I wanted to think. However, I realized with time that you cannot make a difference disappear by ignoring it. And you cannot change people's perceptions about these differences by pretending that they are not there. And the first step in changing anything anyway is to accept that it's there. And so slowly I started to reflect on the fact that, yes, I am blind. And yes, of course, it is inevitable that people, the first time they meet me, it will be something that stands out. And it's not necessarily always a bad thing. Especially, let's say, when I'm playing in a guitar competition, I had this moment of, before I even played one note, people will listen to me because they're curious. Who is this blind person that's on stage? Whether I like it or not, this is just the truth. People will perceive it as such. And then it's up to me. And I think in some ways, my blindness motivated me to be twice as diligent about practicing, so that once I start playing, it becomes a non-issue and people just listen to the music. So, and then once I started to accept that people will notice the blindness, whether I like it or not, then I started to shift also my own perception about my blindness and other people's differences. And I started to realize that there are many ways in which my visual impairment was actually an advantage. I already mentioned the fact that I probably worked twice as hard to become a good guitarist, so that people will not make it an issue when they hear me play. But there are other ways. There are so many different gifts, in a way, and strengths that I developed through being blind. The second one would be focus. I mean, I am not as easily distractible. Mind you, now I can be as caught up in notifications, if I'm not careful, in the the smartphones are as addictive for me as for anybody else. But in general, let's say I can focus on my inner world and on my task at hand, I think easier because I have less visual distractions. I could talk an hour only about how blindness has made me a better musician, whether it's through memorizing everything I play and learning the piece using the Braille music notation or the hand-ear coordination, but I will not get into the musical advantages of being blind. Let me just say that I often tell my students that I am forced to do what any good musician should do anyway. Another great gift for being blind was my guide dog. I think I learned so much through learning how to work with a guide dog. It's all about clear communication, about patience, about giving your partner the chance to succeed rather than judging their failures, about positive rewards of their success rather than judging or being negative for their failures. And all these things ultimately are qualities that any team worker can appreciate. And I think I grew a lot in these areas just by having this guide dog. And on top of it, it's a lot of fun to just have this animal next to you that you trust, and it's a pet, but it's so much more than a pet. There is another way in which blindness was a gift for me, and it's a double-edged one. People, I think, tend to be generally more kind. I remember walking at some point with my husband. We were walking out of Tim Hortons, and he was following me as I walked out with my guide dog. And I heard him say, "Thank you." And I asked him, why did you say thank you? And he said, "Well, somebody held the door for you." And I said, "Oh, I thought it was an automatic door." So unseen automatic doors and people that actually are doing something nice for me. Well, to be sure, sometimes it's not always as smooth. Sometimes people decide that they absolutely need to help me cross the street when it wasn't even my intention to cross in that direction. And then it's actually way better if they would just ask instead of just deciding to grab my arm and scaring me half to death. But in general, people tend to have more patience or kindness. And I ask myself why. And I think it is because people they see I'm blind and they perceive this difference, and they perceive it as a challenge. And of course, to some extent it is a challenge, but as I'm telling you, in so many ways, it was also an advantage. But nevertheless, because people see this what they perceive as a challenge that I have to cope with day in, day out, they are all of a sudden more kind. And I can't help thinking that if we could only realize that everybody, whether it's visible or not, has a cross to bear, or let's put it this way, has some issues, whether it's low self-esteem or self-sabotaging behavior or who knows what. And if we could remember meeting people to be as kind with them, just because we don't see their struggles or their challenges doesn't mean they don't have them. So I think that, and in that sense also, I wanted to talk to you about, to conclude, about this app that is probably embodying this phenomenon of kindness towards other people. It's called Be My Eyes. And it has less to do with AI, but a lot to do with accessibility and with social awareness. It's an app that allows anybody to become a volunteer, and people that are visually impaired can at any time pick up the phone and start a voice chat, and whoever is available around the world can pick up their phone and give them visual clues. Let's say I forgot to label my teas in my cupboard, and I can ask somebody from Australia if this is a chamomile tea or a mint tea. I mean, in the meantime, I could probably do this with AI apps like Microsoft Seeing AI, but in some other instances, it's not possible. And it's so gratifying for me to receive help from people, and also for people to donate just 1 minute or two of their time and know that they made a difference. And I think this is a great example how technology can create these beautiful links among people and open horizons. So to conclude, I just wanted to say that yes, technology and AI can change our perceptions about what is possible and can open doors that would have been inaccessible to us. But at the same time, also, we need to change our perceptions so that to make sure that the technology reflects and it's going in the right direction and reflects these shifts in our own attitudes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ioana. Now we can take questions. So you have two ways. Either raise your hand if you find the button, or just send a chat message saying I have a question, and I'll call your name and unmute you. So let's see if that works. So B. Cavello says, I wish we could applaud audibly. I can unmute everybody.
Yeah, that would overload the internet.
I think so, yeah. But yeah, that's what I felt also after you finish your talk. I felt I could applaud. Okay, so let's see. Jim, do you want to ask your question with voice? So you want me to unmute yourself? Or maybe you can unmute yourself. We have a question from Jim Miller. Let's see if he wants to ask it lively. Okay, anybody else has any question? Send a message and I'll unmute you.
Somebody raised their hand. Yep.
Okay, so Elnaz has a question. 1 second, let me find you in the list.
I can unmute myself.
Okay, yes, go ahead.
Wonderful.
Hi. Hi. I have a question actually regarding VR. Do you think like that can help bridge the gap for the VR headsets? I know they are
Absolutely
bulky, but yeah.
I think that I'm looking forward anxiously when Apple is going to bring out Apple glasses. There are now all the solutions that put a camera on my head are very expensive, like the equivalent of Google Glass, but there are apps that especially, like there is a great service called Ira where these are, rather than the volunteers from Be My Eyes, these are paid specialized instructors that can help you, and people can navigate airports with those. And then it's really important that you can keep your phone in your pocket and have your hands free. Even for the app I was mentioning, there's an app that you can, that they're developing here at McGill to, that uses AI to analyze street crossings and tell you when you're crossing the street, if you're crossing in a straight line. And you can imagine that this is quite an essential skill to have, especially when you're going with a cane, that you hit the right corner. But right now, the way it works is you need to have your phone in a bag on, like hanging on your neck or hold it. It's very awkward. So yes, absolutely. Glasses with a camera and with headphones. There are these great Bose glasses that you could actually hear the music and the sound from your phone. And it's so cool because it's essential for blind people to have their ears open, because you need to still hear the traffic and other information. So it's open ear in a way. It's because your ears are completely unblocked. And if they would just add the camera, that would be it. I would buy those.
Yes, I mean, that also helps with people that they're not completely blind, but they are like very, very low vision, right? So
exactly.
Like,
the whole
like
range.
albinos. Yeah. Yep.
Absolutely. Or people that are night blind, or there are so many ways. I mean, in fact, I think the people that are totally blind, as myself, are a small minority of what we generally call blind or visually impaired.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I know I could use some of those glasses to find the food in the fridge. I never seem to find the right food. My wife always has food, and she has to point me exactly where it is, so I could buy some of those glasses myself. Okay, so we have a question from Jim. He asked me to read it myself. So his question is, if technology evolved so much that there was a way to safely tie directly into your brain using computer-brain interfaces so that you could see, quote unquote, see images transmitted directly into your brain, would you do that? And then he said, lovely quote, I'm a blind guitarist, I'm a blown guitarist. They're both irrelevant.
Yes. Right, they are, but thank you. Yeah, they are and they are not, of course. Like I was saying, blindness did affect, like my access, for example, to learning music is very different because I need to have everything transcribed into Braille. And in fact, this is one of the places where accessibility still lags behind, because books have become way more accessible since we have text-to-speech. But anyway, to go back to the question with the technology, in other words, would I want to become Jordi LaForge? I'm a big Trekkie, and I always thought that was very cool. I think it would need to depend on how reliable the technology is, what it implies. Like I wouldn't want to live with headaches and confusion constantly. I think I would need to know that I can switch it on or off, or that it be interested to test it out. I wouldn't want something irreversible and then suffer long-term because of sensory overload or something like that. But sure, it's fascinating.
Okay, Alex was unmuted, so I muted him.
No worries.
Okay,
no worries.
So the next question. Okay, he said sorry. Okay. So another question from B. Cavello, if you want to unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hey there. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and for sharing your music as well. I wanted to ask you,
thank you.
I work at the Partnership on AI, an organization that's really dedicated to kind of the ethics and governance of artificial intelligence technologies. And one of the things that has come up in that space in general is a question around sort of data privacy and people's ability to kind of choose how they interact with these systems. And something that's been on my mind a lot has been, thinking about tools like screen readers or other accessibility devices or tools. It feels like you really need to trust the entity that's providing that technology. And I was wondering if that's ever a factor for you when you're deciding about using a tool, or if you've had any experiences coming up against that question.
Well, I think that the screen readers are kind of objectively just trends. They are very dependent on how well the elements on screen are coded. And I could just say it's less a matter of trust, but of convenience. It's so frustrating. You fill out a form on the web, and often the fields aren't labeled properly. So you don't know if you're putting in your last name and your first name. But the worst one is when you manage, the form is quite accessible and the submit button is not labeled. And then you go like, am I canceling or am I submitting? So
no.
It's really like, and these are things that every day, day to day, we need to deal with things like that. And accessible web design and accessible app design is such a big issue. And I'm always and it takes a lot of energy, and you need to be a bit of an ambassador. I personally, I like to do it, but it takes time and energy. I always submit reports to app developers and saying this works, this doesn't work, and I share screen recordings and whatever. Because I just, that's by raising awareness. That's the only way we can really try to shift people's perception of that these things are important. They make a huge difference. And some, again, like, what can I say? It's, but it's less a matter of trust. If you want, I think there's a sense of trust if you're going to ask a volunteer to help you around the house. Of course, you want to be a bit careful. You don't want to necessarily read them your bank statements or not, or you would think twice about that. But still, especially if it's a professional service, then then you have everything logged. But yeah, AI and technology in general can be very empowering, but there's still a lot of hurdles and that need to be. But for example, even in hardware, like street crossings, there is no reason to have a button that you can press when to cross, and that thing is not accessible. And you can retrofit things so easily. And there are, in the meantime, apps that allow you, when you're close to a intersection, to basically request the walk cycle from your phone. So you don't need to clamber upon snow mountains and find the stupid button and then find your way back to the street corner. And anyway, there's so many details that people, if they would be just slightly more sensitive to them as they build them, it would make a world of difference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Another question from Monica Chertishanu. If you can.
My cousin. Yeah, sure.
She has to use English though.
Sure. Okay, sure. Absolutely.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Ioana.
Hey.
So, yeah, I really appreciated, your comment when it came to stating something very important that maybe is not a very common perception, that, when you do have a visible disability, people in general, there is a societal perception that there is a need to help. Whereas people that have, more hidden disabilities, they don't necessarily have that perception upon them, and maybe possibly would get less help. And I think that's something very important where AI would come in. But then it drives the question, you were saying the story where you were trying to cross the street and you weren't necessarily going into the right direction, and somebody just took your arm and they were like, okay, I'll help you go left, where you were trying maybe either to stay in place or go right. So that brings the question, does AI kind of do the same thing? Does it steer you sometimes in the wrong direction? And do you think that there's advances that are done fast enough in both fields, whether it's to help people with hidden disabilities and perceptive, very visible disabilities? So I guess that's the questions.
Yeah. I think there are lots of advances being made, but like any new technology, and often, you can't foolproof. It's like even with GPS, I have a GPS specialized apps that tell you where to go, but you still better rely, and you should know how to read your traffic when you're, or you need to still be able to orient yourself. Although you have these apps, you cannot fully rely on them. And sometimes it's funny, like I take a picture and I was focusing on my husband and they said 40-year-old man, and he's like, oh great, I'm younger than they think I'm younger than I am, so it's not foolproof, but it's getting there. But like any new technology will make his toddler's steps on sometimes giant steps, but it's all, it's in the making, and it's not foolproof, and you still need to use your judgment. As for hidden disability, like I was saying, it's a two-edged thing. People that have a hidden disability might not get the help they need, but they also will not have to deal with any patronizing assumptions of people that you need help, rather than just people being open to asking you or something. Because the amount of times people said that, oh, right, you dropped your harness. And I said, no, I didn't drop my harness. I put it down. Oh, you lost your harness. No, I didn't lose it. I put it down voluntarily. Anyway, so sometimes, the willingness to help can turn into a patronizing or pitying, and that's another whole other issue. So, always two sides of the coin.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ioana.
Thanks.
Let's take one more question from Alex. Do you want to read it? If you want to unmute yourself. Oh, we have another hands up, so we'll take more.
Okay. Yeah. So actually, it's awesome because Monica's question was kind of along the same lines that I had. So I do look at sort of cognitive and neurodiversity and different kind of invisible disabilities, and I was wondering the same thing about how they're perceived. But the question I have is, since they're kind of harder for people to imagine, they're harder for people to sort of guess at what the experience might be like. Do you know of any good tools or apps or even research methods that help people sort of have that empathy, help them get that understanding?
I know it mainly in the visual field because that's more, but there are apps, for example, that simulate a whole range of visual disabilities, tunnel vision, night blindness. I couldn't, different ways of seeing, so that it gets people, that gives people the chance to actually look at their surroundings through these different visual impairments. I honestly know less about it because I just kind of can only speak mainly about my own experience. But
right,
yeah, I'm sure that there must be, apps or things that can help. I'm sure for hearing impairments now with sign language, people don't need to always be able to speak sign language. I think there are apps that allow people to speak normally, and the person gets things translated, and even just speech recognition and all these things, they will be able to change. But in terms of empathy, I think everybody needs to be a bit of an ambassador and talk about these things, ideally, I think, in a kind way, but whichever way. And sometimes it might take a bit extreme, like protests or more extreme. Some people will get maybe angry about some lack of sensitivity, and to each their own way. But I think that's all. We all need to be ambassadors a bit.
Awesome.
But I'm less familiar with the technology. Sorry about that.
No, thank you.
Simona had a suggestion to hire visually impaired UX consultants. That's a good idea.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think that like I'm doing a lot of work for free if people are interested. And the number of accessibility debugs that I worked with Apple for hours is pretty, yeah. Good suggestion, Mona. I like the way you're thinking, Simona.
You might be a bit biased there with Simona. Okay.
Sure.
One more question from Ron.
Ioana, I don't mean at all to embarrass you in any way, but I think it would be very, very, very interesting for you to tell us about how a service like Aira can help you even pick up after your dog.
Yeah, no, it's the weirdest situations. Yeah, I was just talking to my friend Ron about this. It's pretty funny. I was talking about Be My Eyes, this volunteer app, versus the specialized help people that are offering a similar video call at the tip of your fingers. And indeed, sometimes there might be instances where you don't really want to call a volunteer and about some more embarrassing thing, like, do my clothes match, or do I have socks on of the same color because I have an interview? But if you know that you're calling a specialist that is trained to be sensitive to the day-to-day a person has, then it might make you less shy. So I don't think I would have ever used a random volunteer to ask to check if I picked up properly after my dog. But with a specially trained service like Aira, I thought, well, okay, rather than risking stepping tomorrow in it, I'd rather take out my phone and ask them to make sure that I picked up after Cheerio, my little guide dog. So, yep, indeed. You never know what might come up. Thanks, Ron.
Okay, thank you very much, Ioana. Amazing presentation, and thank you all for asking interesting questions.